Welcome to Russian History with Dr. Brovkin and Contemporary Issues with Dr. Brovkin. Today's presentation I shall title, Can Ukraine Win? Now, the reason I'm doing this is there's a first time in many months that has been an interesting development and a kind of a debate in the American establishment over this issue. Can Ukraine win? And if it does not, or if it does, what to do next? Now, as you all know, the Western media has been shouting for the last 6 months that Ukraine can win. And it all started with the successful breakthrough at Kharkov in August, September, and then by the regrouping of the Russian forces and withdrawal of those forces from Kherson in the south. And all of that gave Ukrainians a feeling that they're winning, Russians are retreating, and the supply of Western arms made them think that victory is possible. And the entire Western media, as I said, just kept on talking that it can win. Moreover, there were several important articles written in Western media, such as Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, published an article in Foreign Affairs or Politico, arguing that it's useless to negotiate with the Russians, and that the winning of Crimea is feasible, possible, and it would be a good lesson to the aggressor, that is Russians, and it would be something that Americans should support. Obviously this goes well with the Biden policy of providing anything at all possible to ensure that Russia is punished for its aggression, as it is called, and that Ukrainians win the entire territory of the borders of 1991, which means the entire Donbass and Crimea. Now, to accomplish this goal, this is all public information, Zelensky and his chief of staff, Zaluzhny, requested 300 or 500 tanks, artillery, then the infantry vehicles, and long-range bombs, flying missiles and HIMARS and all kinds of stuff. American generals, when I listened to the discussion, added to this that this is not enough, that they also have to have helicopters and air support. Now, the plan that they inaugurated is quite simple. They said basically that the breakthrough of the front to Opol would bring them to the shore of Azov Sea, and that way they would surround surround Crimea, and also they want to blow up the bridge to Crimea, and in that sense Crimea would be totally surrounded. It would be impossible to supply it. They hope, the Ukrainians, Russians will withdraw just as they withdrew from Kherson. So this is their plan to liberate, as they put it, Crimea. Now, of course, is it feasible? And as I said, most of the Western media kept on talking until a couple of days ago that it's feasible. Now, all of a sudden, there's a new paper that appeared that created a kind of a sensation in the circles of those critics of the war by the Rand Corporation. And this new paper argues that the American goals in this war are different from the Ukrainian ones. In a nutshell, the Rand Corporation paper says that U.S. priorities are different. U.S. priorities should be focused on China, and Russia is a secondary priority, and it would be too costly to sustain the offensive operations. It costs billions of budgetary support to Ukrainians. It costs billions and billions of arms, and the Russians had already destroyed 2,000 tanks, and supplying of another 300 or 400 tanks is not going to make a big difference. In other words, the Rand Corporation makes a very good case that military victory in terms of winning back the territories of Donbass and Crimea is impossible. That's pretty much what they say. Moreover, the extent to which the United States should supply necessary equipment for it to be feasible is not worth it. So that's the argument, and so you have essentially the argument on one side that it is possible, on the other side that it isn't possible. Now, exactly at the same time as the Rand paper came out, there's an article by Mr. McFall, whom I know quite well, and he used to be a Russian ambassador. American ambassador in Russia, and he's terribly anti-Russian. He just hates everything Russian and keeps on, pumping up more and more and more military ardor in his speeches and his recommendations. So basically, McFall's article is exactly the opposite of that of Rand Corporation, and it was a kind of an argument of the hawks. And so he basically argues double down. If it's not enough, let's put more. Let's give them more. And so he basically says the United States has stealth aircraft and it has F-35s. Why give them F-15s, the outdated ones? Why not give them the best and the latest? Why not give them helicopters and tanks and long-range missiles so that it can really hurt Russia, so that they can win and punish Russia, and so on and so on and so forth. Now, the question that is asked, obviously, and that I ask, is it feasible? Is it possible for the United States to supply all these things that McFall is talking about? Now, my answer is no, it's not, even if they wanted to. Here's why. One F-15 costs $130 million. Now, 10 of them would be more than $1 billion, and 10 of them would not make much of a difference. To really have an attack air force that can control the skies, you have to have several hundred. And then that would cost already close to a trillion, but with attack helicopters and tanks and so forth. But another thing, of course, is that don't forget, Mr. McFall, that Russia has Su-35s, and these aircraft are just as good as F-35, and some specialists think they're better. And Su-55 is something that the Russians have. Moreover, and this is what Scott Ritter put in writing, another analyst that is very critical of U.S. military capability in Ukraine. He says basically that the Russians have the best air defense system in the world, and that as soon as these F-15s or F-35s hit the skies, they will be hit out, and they would be destroyed by Russian air defense systems. So the same thing goes about the tanks. Now, this is what Scott Ritter says. Don't forget that Russians have already destroyed over about 1,500 tanks that Ukraine received from Western allies, from NATO. These were Soviet-made tanks that the US was buying all over the world and delivering to the Ukrainians. Now they're all gone, and this is why now they're talking about Abrams banks and Leopard 2 tanks that should replace those, because there's simply no former Soviet tanks available. Now, where is the guarantee that they are not going to burn just as much as the previous bunch? A couple of things about tanks that military specialists say, and I'm not a military specialist, but I can repeat what they say. They say that Western tanks need a whole lot of maintenance, and fuel is different for Abrams as opposed to Leopard 2 tanks, and that the crews have to be trained, and not in 2 weeks and not in 2 months. You need serious training how to use this very sophisticated machinery. Moreover, another Russian specialist said that they're too heavy. Abrams is 60 tons and Leopard 2 is 72 tons. That means that they're going to have a hard time transporting those things only by train, and not all bridges can sustain such weight. And then they're too heavy for Russian terrain, Ukrainian terrain. So, in other words, there are all kinds of logistical obstacles and difficulties to use these tanks and as Scott Ritter said, they might be perceived as fighting fortresses, but in fact turn into metal coffins on the battlefield. But be it as it may, the point, of course, is that we have two plans. You have Rand plan, which is try to seek a negotiated settlement in Russia, and you have McFaul plan, which is double down, supply more, and try to win. So, what is the Russian response to this? The Russian response has been aired by Putin a few days ago when he was speaking about commemoration of 80 years of the Stalingrad battle. He basically said, addressing Germany, that it is unacceptable to have German tanks with German insignia, just as I said in the previous video, on Russian soil, and that our response would come in its due course, and it certainly will not be just a matter of armored vehicles. Lavrov, also Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, gave a response that if the United States provides long-range missiles that can hit Russian territory, that would only mean that if it's 100 miles, that Russian troops would have to go an extra 100 miles into Ukraine to make sure that they would not be able to reach Russian territory. What about the Rand offer? The articles discuss what exactly is the possibility of peace if the United States' objective of winning with the Ukraine is impossible. So the discussion goes that the offer that is being hinted at right now is to have 20% of Ukrainian territory being accepted as Russian. The peace is agreed upon on these conditions: that Ukraine is neutral, that the rest of Ukraine that is not occupied by Russia will be a member of the EU but would not join NATO. Now, the question, of course, is will the Russians go for it? And here, my personal view is that if it is a serious offer right now, not in terms of an article in the newspapers, but if there was a kind of a serious U.S. government official offer of a peace on the terms, as Rand suggests, that the current provinces of Donbass plus Kherson and Zaporozhye and Crimea are recognized in a peace treaty as Russian territory, and if Ukraine is neutral and not a member of NATO and all foreign troops are withdrawn, and if sanctions are lifted, my personal opinion is that probably President Putin would agree for these terms right now. However, there are many people in Russia, if you follow Russian media, that would not accept this, and it's not even clear whether Putin would prevail upon these are the hawks in his administration and in the military, because what they want is something else. Here's my impression of what they want, the hawks in Russia. They want to make sure that there's no threat to Russia ever from Ukraine. They do not want to deal at all with Zelensky or Zaluzhny or any of the people associated with a nationalist Bandera-type government. They probably want to annex large parts of Ukraine, especially the Russian-speaking territories such as Odessa and Kharkov and the entire eastern Ukraine, east of the Dnieper River. Some actually go further and demand that there's a capitulation of Ukraine and that the rest of Ukraine is governed as a kind of occupied territory for an indefinite period of time. They also want to make sure that there is a treaty that stops NATO expansion and actually reverses some of the recent members of NATO that had been admitted to some indefinite period in the past. Originally, Putin said NATO back to 1997 borders. I don't think that's feasible, but at least this is what they want. In other words, right now there is a kind of interesting new situation. For the first time in almost a year, that the Russian army is getting stronger and stronger with every passing week. The sanctions didn't work, and the Ukrainian offensive is fizzled out, and the Russian new offensive began. And in these conditions, there is a rift of two visions of how to get out of it, and as I've discussed in this video, and it's interesting to see which of those will prevail. But military victory is certainly not on the cards. Thank you very much. Until next time, don't forget to subscribe.